Dennis is an atheist and wants to ask how we respond to theists who keep on mentioning Bible verses without debating them. Dennis, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, very well.
Right, so yeah,
So tell us
it's,
about your question situation.
it's just every time I try to talk with theists, they always come up with these Bible verses, right? So it's just I think it's called circular reasoning, but it's just annoying sometimes, right? That they keep on mentioning these Bible verses. So I just want to know, how do you respond to these types of situations with atheists?
Paul, go for it.
Um, so I guess you mentioned that it's circular reasoning. Mentioning a Bible verse isn't necessarily always circular reasoning, depending on the context and what they're saying with it. Although I get that a lot of times what they're doing is trying to say that they're assuming that you would give the book the same authority that they would, and that, for example, when I was a theist, certainly we would call that like proof texting, right? Where we all would agree that the Bible is an infinite authority, so all you need to do to support a position would be to say that the Bible verse says it. And I'm assuming that's what the context of what's happening for you is. That sound right? Where they're trying to say because the Bible says X, Y, or Z, you should believe X, Y, and Z. Is that the situation you're getting into?
Yeah, definitely. That's the same situation that oh, it's true because the Bible says so. So I think that's circular reasoning, right?
Well, yeah, for sure. At that point, it's circular reasoning would be more like saying the Bible is true because the Bible says it's true. So if they're trying to use the Bible justifying itself, but what I think this is more of a situation. I think the claim of circular reasoning or the accusation of circular reasoning may fall deaf on them because they've already just accepted it as an authority. I think what I try and do in that situation is try to demonstrate to them, and a lot of times they haven't even thought about this, that the Bible isn't actually an authority for you, that you don't treat the Bible as any more weighing in on your life than the Chronicles of Narnia, or some other holy book that maybe they would also reject. So have you tried that? Have you tried like giving them more of a sense that the Bible isn't authority for you, so what else do we have to talk about? Or does it kind of become a stalemate?
It's just I just try to tell them that you cannot just mention the Bible because it's, yeah, as I said earlier, it's circular reasoning. You can prove it because the Bible tells you so. So that is just my response to them.
So
Yeah.
even though
I would.
literally my
Yeah.
mug here says "For the Bible tells me so," like it's a literal jingle on my channel, it's not universally the case. But go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just as a correction, instead of saying it's circular reasoning, perhaps better it would say that it's begging the question that,
Hmm.
as Paul was saying, that you don't take what the Bible says and as an authority. So quoting it at you is basically to assume it's authority that you don't accept. So basically, that person is begging the question. You should believe what I'm saying because I already happen to believe it, and we already assumed you believed it. But it's one of those premises that is not initially defended. But of course, if they try to then defend what the Bible says based on something else the Bible says, then you're definitely getting into circular reasoning territory.
All right, got you on that. And I have another question regarding this. It's just because there was one time that I had a debate with a theist, and he said, and I asked him, why do you keep on? You're a religious person, right? And why do you keep on always committing sins, doing bad things? And he replied that it's because we're still in the human form. We're still this. We're bound to sin. I mean, I just don't know how to respond sometimes to that.
Well, what question were you? Is your understanding of Christianity that a perfect Christian would be without sin from this point on in their life? Is that your understanding of how their religion would work?
No, it's just why basically why they are always they are Christians or religious people who do bad things even though they're religious, right? So I'm not sure. That's why I've asked him why there are people who always do bad things even though let's say like the pastors. or those people in high authorities in churches, why they some of them are convicted with, you know, rape or some other stuff. So why do they commit those things even though they are um yeah, the blessed with God or guided by God? So yeah.
Well, the flavor of Christian that I was, and I can't speak to other religions like Islam or some of the others, but the flavor of Christian that I was absolutely accounts for that. And in fact, they make that part of their pillar of what they're doing is that all have sinned and fallen short, and that there's literally no human on earth that can live up to the ideals. And so anytime a pastor falls or whatever, for them, that is just a reminder that no matter how pious or holy you seem on the outside, ultimately the sin isn't cured by anything that a person can do themselves. So in a way, they've built the system such that those are affirming as opposed to disaffirming. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
So if I was putting on my Jesus hat there, I don't, obviously that's not what I accept today, but that is a feature they've built in, sort of this self-affirming kind of notion of it. So when you bring up those examples to them, it's not going to put a chink in the armor. You can say things like, well, the divorce rate among Christians is just as high, or is just as high rate of cheating on taxes. Like there's lots of these studies, right, where the religiosity doesn't seem to make you behave better, but Christianity at least have baked that in. I don't know, Aaron, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I come from a Catholic background, and Dennis, you're in the Philippines, which is also, for understand, if it's Christian, it's mostly Catholic there, from my understanding, and so the phrase Catholic guilt is pretty common for that. So everyone's guilty, everyone's a screw up, everyone has original sin, everyone is naughty. So yeah, as Paul is saying, it's pretty much built in to the theology there. But what often is said is that if you are following the teachings, then you should be more moral, you should be more outstanding, that you are called to be so. And then you can say, hey, if that were the case, then let's take a look at the stats and say, hey, people who are religious are not more moral. In fact, it seems like the more secular countries seem to actually be uh, better on crime statistics and other things like that. So, if anything, the hypothesis goes in the opposite direction. And that's harder to explain if religion is supposed to somehow make people even 1% better, if they're no better or even potentially worse, or in the case of the Catholic Church, is literally an organized pedophile ring because of what they have done with their priests around the world. You can't basically say there's any sort of moral authority or moral status that's better because of that religion. In fact, it adds power structures that seems to protect some of the worst offenders.
So your observation there,
Right.
Dennis, was amazing for whether Christianity is useful. I immediately, my default, and it's a fault of mine, I default often goes to the question of, does that make it true or false? Your observation can't prove whether it's true or false, but your observation is absolutely damning if someone comes to you and says, regardless of whether it's true, Christianity is useful or religion in general is useful. What you notice there, as Aaron highlighted, it absolutely undermines, of course, the utility of religion.
Yeah, appreciate the answer. And my last question, this is my last question, and because I also debated someone over the internet, and she asked me that if Jesus did not rise, I mean, if Jesus did not rise from the dead, where's the body? So I just replied, the body just decomposed. But he, fortunately, she did not accept the answer. She said, if you can provide me the body, then I would be an atheist right this very moment. So, just want to know how do you respond to that?
I can't find the body of Julius Caesar. Does that mean he is risen? Probably not, right? Most people from that far back are dust. And I don't think not being able to find the body of a 2,000-year-old carpenter is even evidence that they've risen from the dead. It just means you ain't got a body. And that's pretty consistent with how almost everyone has ever died for the last 100,000 years.
So, Dennis, that Christian is likely going to more point to the say, because of course, if we found a body now and claimed that it would be Jesus, there's no way to determine, right, whether that's Jesus. They've got the one crucifixion victim they found, Yohanin, in Jerusalem, who had a nail still in his ankle. No one could ever say. We don't have DNA tests. We don't know who Jesus. So obviously anything now. I think the more challenging thing that a Christian might posit to you, though, is why didn't they in those early days, if the Romans were so sure, bring out the body and say, hey, this is where Christianity is. I do think about this a lot, and I write about this a lot. One of the things that really, unfortunately, isn't as convincing to Christians as it should be, but historically, if you think about where was the body of the thief beside Jesus, where did that end up? Forget the Jesus story because that's a special story, but the thief beside Jesus probably ended up, if the Romans dealt with him, ended up being food for dogs, tossed on the side of the road. If his family came and got him, then he would have ended up in a family plot in the town where that thief was from. Now we assume that Jesus was not from Jerusalem because most of the stories about him don't place him in that city. So that meant that Jesus' body would have gone far away if the family disowned him, got him. But the records don't show that the family was able to influential enough to get the body either. The third option is that the Sanhedrin has to bury him. And there's very strict rules that a crucifixion victim has to be buried in a separate graveyard, one of two separate graveyards outside of the city, where they don't mark the graves, where the disgrace is part of it. No one's allowed to mourn. So the most likely cases where Jesus' body would have ended up is in a place where no one could have retrieved it, right? So, but the Christians have this special case. Well, we came up with this story in the Bible where this rich person who had just the exact right political connections to get the body put him in a place that could be remembered. Well, that is the least likely case when you talk about a general person who was crucified. So, like, really, the real answer is most likely Jesus was put somewhere where no one knew where he was. No one outside of his followers were interested in him at the time enough to like mark the grave and do all this stuff. So the Christian story is implausible. But then you add on top of that, by the time anyone cared about Christianity as a movement, we're talking about years now. So let's imagine a dead body that you pull out of the grave now. Not even now, because now we have DNA and we have all these things. But let's say in the first century, you pull a dead corpse out of the ground and say, well, here's the corpse of a Jewish man that has been decayed for, let's say, at least 40 days, right? At that point in time, who's going to believe, if you believe that Jesus rose from the dead, are you going to believe that this corpse that they dragged out was Jesus? Like, what are we imagining here? Even if you just are familiar with body decomposition now, it doesn't take that long for, they need dental records to identify these people or DNA tests, right? So this whole notion that the Romans could have, from some marked grave, which is very unlikely in and of itself, pulled out that body and convinced a believer that that was Jesus, I don't imagine how that could even work. It seems, it's one of those objections that seems strong until you push against it a little bit. Like, what about a dead body would have convinced a believing Christian that he was not risen? Does that jive with your thoughts about it, or are these new thoughts? And did my monologue make you? Sorry, I rant.
Oh, no, it's just was clueless before on how to respond that, but thankfully you have clarified that to me.
Well, let me ask, but does that make sense to you at all? Is what I say, do you think that that's a good objection?
Yeah, of course. I believe so.
And I'm going to just throw and add on there because one thing I want to highlight the 40 days aspect, because that's the earliest, according to the Christian tradition itself, that the disciples went public with their Jesus is back from the dead message. So that's 40 days of a corpse potentially rotting away to the point that it would probably be unrecognizable. But even under the assumption that someone would still want to go and pull out the body to show everyone that Jesus was not risen from the dead, they would have ended up committing a crime because they would have been desecrating a grave. And tomb robbing is actually a capital offense in this time, both under Jewish and under Roman law. So whoever was going to go and try to do that would have also basically said, here's the body and here's my neck, because I just committed a capital crime publicly. It's a pretty hard sell that that's even a possible argument that could have happened in the first few months of the Nicene religion.
Guys, I truly appreciate the response. So thank you.
Well, these are great
thank you for
questions,
taking my
Dennis.
call.
Really good questions.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for taking my call. Have a great day.
Thank you for calling in. All right.
Sorry, Aaron, when it gets to resurrection related questions, I just click in on ramble
Yeah.
mode. But
Well, you've been at this for, what, 2-3 weeks?
yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff, good stuff. I will try to spend some more time there. I have a copy of Habermas's Evidences' book. I'm not sure how many times I'm supposed to pluralize that word.
It's a 5-pounder.
Oh, that it is. That
it
is.
And I just finished volume 2, actually. Volume 2 came out about 3 weeks ago, and I just wrapped that up. It's another 900 pages, so it's a lot.
Yeah, for the most part, I have done most of my focus related to the birth story rather than the death story.